One of the most powerful features in the CSS Grid specification is the ability to create responsive layouts without using media queries. This is done using the repeat function, which we've used earlier, along with the auto placement keywords called AutoFit or AutoFill. These keywords allow you to place as many grid items of a particular size on a row that will fit within the width of the viewport. We're looking at this page in Firefox. Firefox has some great inspection tools we're going to use in a moment, so that's why we're using Firefox. Here's an example of both AutoFit and AutoFill at work. Watch what happens. We have 4 grid items inside a container up here at the top, and those 4 grid items are specified to be no less than 200 pixels in width, so a min of 200 pixels. Down on the bottom, we have another container. This one is using what's called AutoFill. Let's watch how these behave when we make the browser narrower. So at some point, the browser is no longer going to be able to fit 4 boxes of 200 pixels wide. Right there approximately. So there comes a point when the viewport or the browser width is too little, and it has to do something with the box that no longer fits because each box has to be at least 200 pixels wide. So in both cases, the 4th box here, which would no longer fit, has to shift down to the 2nd row as such. There are no media queries written here. This is all happening implicitly through the use of either AutoFit or AutoFill, and we'll explain the difference in a moment. At a certain point when the viewport is narrow, these two will behave in the same way, right? Watch what happens as I go even narrower. At some point, even 3 boxes on a row will not fit, and it's going to have to shift 2 of the boxes down below. And it did that with both AutoFit and AutoFill. Where you see a difference in AutoFit and AutoFill is when the viewport gets wider. Watch what happens here. So here's 3 boxes on a row. Here are 4. But there gets to be a point down here when 5 boxes would fit on a row, and watch what AutoFit and AutoFill do with that. Okay, right about there, the browser is saying we could fit a 5th box on the 1st row because we have enough space in the viewport width to handle 5 boxes of 200 pixels in width. But the way the two handle it is different. So AutoFit does the following. It takes those boxes and continues them on the row as though there is no longer another column over here to the side. So it will automatically fit on the row and make them as wide as they need to be to do that. With AutoFill, on the other hand, the browser is saying, I could handle another box of 200 pixels in width, but AutoFill is saying, let's leave some space there. Here's where the inspection tools in Firefox come in handy. I'm going to right-click on the screen here somewhere, and I'm going to do Inspect Element in Firefox. I'll move this window up just a little bit. All right. Over on the right side over here, under the section that says Grid, below that there are some checkboxes for the overlay grid. I'm going to turn on, first of all, the div container 1, and I'm going to turn on display line numbers. Let me scroll up to the top here. Here's what's going on. With AutoFit, the browser is showing you with the inspect elements in Firefox that there are 4 columns here, but actually there are more than that. In fact, if you look in the upper right-hand corner up here, it says the number 6, and underneath that is another item, which is actually the column line numbers being shown, right? This is column line 1 over on the left side. Next is column line 2, then 3, then 4. And it's saying there are actually 6 columns here, and it's showing you there's something below that. So what AutoFit does is it essentially creates the columns, but it sort of hides them by stacking them one on top of another over on the right side. You'll notice a difference if we turn on the div container 2 down here under the inspection tools, and we scroll down now to the next grid container, which is the one using AutoFill. This is showing you here across the top that the column line numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, but it's actually showing you this 5th column, if you will, between column lines 5 and 6 as extra space there. So the way it handles it is different. Again, with AutoFit, it makes the columns, and the column line numbers are here, 1 through 6 at the top, but the 5th column between columns line 5 and 6 is not showing because they're stacked over on the right side. And again, AutoFill handles it differently. So let's close the inspection tools here and go back and look at the page. like so. Now, if we go even wider, there's going to be enough room in this browser to create room for another box right there. So the viewport width got big enough that with AutoFill, it's now creating 2 extra columns there. If we do the inspection tools there by right-clicking on the screen, inspect element, we turn on div container 1 and 2 and display line numbers. There you can see that now we're stacking up here with AutoFit across the top. The line numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, and 7 are all stacked one on top of the other. 7, 6, 5, if you will. So it doesn't show the column, but it's essentially creating it and hiding it by stacking the line numbers over on the right side. And as you can see here with AutoFit, indeed, it created 2 more columns, and it's showing us those columns. And here the column line numbers across the top are indicating that we have 7 columns as well, just like the one above it. But in this case, we're not hiding these 2 right-hand columns. They're actually showing up on the page. So remember, at a certain width, both AutoFit and AutoFill will have the same result. The difference between AutoFit and AutoFill can only be seen when there are fewer grid items than could fit on a row. And in that example, each grid item is 200 pixels wide. Let's go ahead and set up this page to do it, and you can follow along. So we're going to go to our learning folder, and we're going to open our setup document. And we'll open that in brackets. And I'm going to immediately save this, File, Save As. And I'm going to call it Auto-Fit-Fill, because we're going to do both in this document, AutoFit and AutoFill, so I'll call the file Auto-Fit-Fill.html. Save it in my learning folder. We're going to take this div with the class of container and change it to container 1. And we're going to put some title up here above that container with an H2 tag. So I'm going to type H2, and I'm going to type a label of Auto-Fit. So in this first example, we're going to be doing AutoFit, and I've closed the H2 as such. Now we have a container called container 1 where we're going to turn this into an AutoFit element. And I'm going to begin by just putting some boxes inside the container. This will be very simple. I'm just going to type a div open, div close. I'm going to type the number 1 in this one. And I'm going to need 4 boxes, so I'm going to type that out as such. And that's basically all we need for that. We're going to copy and paste that to save ourselves a little typing. This time we're going to call it container 2 for this container, and we're going to use AutoFill as the label. And there we have it. We essentially have 2 containers. The first one is going to be illustrating AutoFit. The second one is going to be illustrating AutoFill down below as such. So that was simple HTML code to write. Let's go write some CSS now. So we're going to go up into the style section here. And the first thing I'm going to do is give some shading to the background of these grid items so that they show up well. So I'm going to type dot container 1. I'm going to do greater than, and I'm going to do div. Put in my 2 braces. And for all the divs inside the first container, we're going to shade them with some background color. So I'm going to type background dash color. I'm going to give it a £, AAA, so a gray color. I'm going to give it a border as well, border, colon, solid, 1 pix, black. I'm going to do the same kind of styling for container 2, so I'm going to copy and paste that. Change this to container 2. I'm going to change the color slightly. I'll make this a lighter gray by going to DDD. I had a misspelling. It's showing in red, so I'll fix the spelling on border. And that's a good start. Let's now start doing the layout. So we're going to need to first of all style the container 1. Well, this needs to be a grid container, so of course we're going to start with DisplayColonGrid. I'm going to come back and do the grid template columns in a moment, but I'm going to do a grid gap. And I'll do it at 5 pixels. Now, here's where the magic comes in. This is where the tool becomes very handy. We simply type out the following, the typical thing we do with grid-template-columns, colon. We're going to put in now the following, repeat, and this is what's going to be a little bit different. Instead of doing repeat something like this, 6, 1FR, we're going to change that up. We're going to type repeat, and then in parentheses, we're going to type the following. Auto-fit, comma, min-max. Inside parentheses, I'm going to type 200 pixels, comma, 1FR, and put my semicolon at the end of that string. So that's what happens. We do a grid template columns. We tell it to repeat. We have added the min-max function, which says 200 pixels at a minimum, 1FR at a maximum. So the main thing that's different here is that instead of putting in a number like 6, we just type in auto-fit. All right, let's check that. Let's save that document, and let's look at auto-fit-fill.html in a browser. And I'll open it in Firefox. Well, it doesn't look very pretty, but you can see what we have. We have done this now so that this is essentially putting those items on a row. Let's make this be a little more obvious. Let's change it and give it a height. So we're going to add to the container 1 the following. Grid-template-rows, colon. And now we're going to type the following, repeat, and inside parentheses we're going to come back and type in the following. We're going to need 2 rows to handle these boxes, so I'll simply do that, 2, comma, and I'll type in 200 pixels as well for the height of the rows. Let's save that and check it. Now it's a little more obvious to see what's going on. I could put a border around the entire container here, which might make it easier to see what's going on with the white space down below. Let me go ahead and do that quickly. So on container 1 itself, I'm also going to add the following. Border, colon, solid, 1 pixel, black. Let's check that. Now you can see that this container up here is using AutoFit, and it has 4 boxes in it. We make the browser narrower. Indeed, it's acting responsively as though we were using media queries by jumping items down to the next box. It's stretching them out across the row. So that's pretty simple. Let's go back down to container 2. So to do that, we're going to save some typing by copying and pasting the container 1 class. Paste it down below. We'll change this one to container 2. And all we're going to change here is change this from AutoFit to AutoFill. All right, so this one, the container 1 is using AutoFit. This one is using AutoFill. Let's check it. And let's see if the containers act as we expect them to. So at this width, they're going to act the same way. They're both of them going to shift an item down to the next row. In this case, there's room only for 2 on a row. And if we go wider, here's what the difference between the two will be seen. You'll notice that AutoFill did what we expected. It created the extra column, but AutoFit made all of the boxes fit across the first row. Going even wider, AutoFill would have fit 2 boxes. So that's pretty simple and easy to do. It works very well when you have a lot of items you want to be responsive and you don't want to do media queries. This will do it automatically for you. It's one of the great things about CSS Grid. Next, we're going to build this site. This is an example of a website that uses AutoFit or AutoFill to do responsiveness, and it does it without media queries. So you can notice here that when we make the browser narrower, there are going to be a couple of areas that change. The first area is going to be at the top where it says want wine, and the other side says come explore the varieties, etc. You'll notice that when I make the browser narrower, the second area will go underneath the first area. So that's the first bit of responsiveness. The other area that's doing that kind of thing is down a little further with what I'm calling these cards. They look kind of like paper cards, if you will. There are drop shadows on them. They have an image of a grape variety, the title of the grape variety, and then a description. Those cards will also change responsively. Notice when I make the browser narrower here, they're shifting down to the next row, and does that all the way to mobile on a one-column layout as well. So we want to learn how to make this site using AutoFit or AutoFill to do the responsiveness. One of the things you want to think about is not doing just one grid for a page layout. This particular layout is using 3 grids actually for the main page layout. The first one is really the simple one. It's the container, and it simply has 3 areas that it's defining for locations. But inside of that are a couple of nested grids. We'll look at that in more detail when we start the code. But the area at the top up here where it says want wine and come explore the varieties, that does its responsiveness because there's a grid there as well. That area has been turned into a grid container, and the items fall into place using AutoFit or AutoFill. And the area where the cards are is inside an area called section, and section is also a grid container, and the cards inside are all items within it. There are some great tools in most of the browsers for inspecting the code. These are called developer tools, and usually you get to them by going to a blank area of the screen and right-clicking and going to inspect. I'm using Microsoft Edge here at the moment, and Edge has the ability to do some really cool things with its inspection tools. First of all, on the right side, it's showing you some of the element styles and those kinds of things. But what I want to point out here is how you can use this to view your site as it would look on particular devices with specific resolutions. For example, up here at the top, there's a drop-down. I'm going to go to the first one that says responsive. And this gives you an idea of how the page looks when people are on, say, a laptop or desktop, and they want to make the page narrower or wider, so you can really see what's going on here. But you may want to look at this for specific devices. So we can change this from responsive to one of these other options. And by the way, there are more options here. If you go to edit, you can add other display resolutions or other devices rather to your list here. But let's suppose we wanted to know what this site looked like on a very old iPhone like a 5 or an SE as well. And that's showing you what that page would look like on that type of device. Let's take that up to something like an iPhone 6, 7, or 8. Notice a little wider resolution. Here's an iPhone 10. And we can get into even bigger devices such as an iPad. And that's how it would look on an iPad in what's called portrait orientation or vertical orientation. There's a button up here at the top, though, that allows you to rotate it. And watch what happens when I do that. Now it's showing you the iPad in what's called landscape orientation or horizontal orientation. And you'll notice that this fits 3 cards really nicely at that. Let's go back to the portrait orientation. And here it fits 2 cards quite nicely as well. We can change that to an iPad Pro and see the type of screen real estate that's used up there. This one will get in portrait 3 to a row and fits nicely 4 to a row when we get to the landscape orientation. So those are great tools. So to give you an idea of what we're going to create here and where the grid items will be and where the grid containers will be, I have this diagram here. I've darkened that a little bit, and we're using the orange boxes to indicate the main grid. Okay, the container grid, if you will, is really defining just 3 elements inside of it for its grid. So a grid item of main, a grid item of section, and a grid item of footer. In fact, this one is so simple we can do it as a 1-column layout, just indicating 1 FR, and just put main at the top, section on the next one, and footer at the next one. Where the real heavy lifting comes in, though, is inside some of these things. For example, inside the main, which will be turned into a grid container, we're going to have 2 grid items within it. And so main is going to be using AutoFit or AutoFill to make the responsiveness happen to the grid items below. which are an H1 and an article. And the other area that does something similar is down below that inside the section. You'll notice here that the section itself will be turned into a grid container, and that container will have 6.card or class items of card as part of its grid items, and that will be responsive as well using AutoFit or AutoFill. Let's go back to the Learning folder, and let's open the document called setup.html. You'll recall this is the document we created, so we have a starting point for every document we create where we don't have to type everything. All right, so if you'll recall, this is what's in the document. I have taken the liberty of simplifying the box sizing, which was applied to the HTML tag and also to some pseudo elements. And I've taken out the vendor prefixes as well. This will simplify your setup.html file so it starts something like this. You'll notice the document also has the meta viewport tag in there, and it has a container, a div with a class of container for the main layout as the grid. We're going to begin in the HTML section and type in the content of the page first. I'm going to go back and forth from time to time, and we're going to look at the page in a browser so you can understand what we're doing. But we're going to start inside the container, and the first element inside of that is going to be called main. Let me go back and look at that. Main is again going to be this area at the top of the screen that says what wine and come explore the varieties and vintages. That area up there is going to be the main, the entire top section. Inside the main, we're going to need an H1 first of all. H1 is what's going to include the want wine statement, like so. So that's simple enough. We'll move on to the next item inside the main. The next item is going to be an article. And the article is going to have some text that will be wrapped inside a paragraph tag. To save some time in typing, I'm going to go back to my example page here, and I'm simply going to select this text that I want to include there on the page and copy it. I'm going to paste that in there like that. That saved us a little time. And there's one more item that needs to go inside the main. You'll notice there's a button here that says View Our Wines. Now, so that's going to happen up here before the article close tag. And it's going to be a link, so we'll do the A space href. I'll simply put a pound sign in there to be a placeholder for our link. And inside of this, it's going to say View Our Wines. Now this one's going to also need a class name. I'm going to give this a class name of button because we're going to be styling that as well. And there's the area inside the main. So again, the main includes an H1 tag, it includes an article, and it includes inside the article the button, which will be styled as well. Underneath main, we're going to put the section. So that's the next major box there. The section is going to contain, first of all, a div with a class of card. Just for the sake of doing some layout here with these boxes, I'm going to quickly put one other little div inside of that. I'll explain it later. It's going to be a div with a class of overlay. Inside that overlay, first of all, is going to go an image. Let me make this a little wider. Image source, first of all. And the source is going to be the images folder. And the image that's going to be here is called Cabernet-Sauvignon.jpg. Just like that. So that's an image that's going to go inside the card, and specifically it's going to be handled for layout with a class of overlay. We're going to add a class name to this as well. I'll do that before the source. So class equals, and inside that we're going to call it variety 1. The other item that's going to go in there is going to be a div with a class name. That class name is going to be variety 2. We're going to type the name of the grape in there. like so. Okay, so this is a div with a class overlay. Below that, we're going to put in a description as well, the text that goes below the image, and that's going to be in a new div. So we're going to type div class equals description. And here's where we need the text of the description. Again, to save time, I'm going to copy that text and paste it. And that will go inside this div here. There's our div with a class of description. This is our div with a class of card. So there's the box, there's the entire card, if you will. It's a inside a section. It starts here with a div class of card. The closing tag is down here. There's a class of overlay, which contains two other items that are variety 1 and variety 2 for class names. And down below that is a div class of description. Now we should be able to take this entire content for the card itself inside the section and copy and paste that about 5 times to get a total of 6 boxes. Let's see if that's what we have. Here's a div class of card. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right, let's go down and add the final element, which will be the footer. That will go below the section. The footer is going to very simply contain a copyright symbol, which can be done as a character entity like that. There we have the HTML. Of course, keep in mind that we are using the same image and the same description for every box, which will be different than the page I made, where I took the liberty of putting in new images for the others, new text. But just for the sake of the example or the lesson here, we're going to just use the same content for each of these. Next up, we're going to go up here to the top and start to write some CSS. The first thing I'm going to do is put something in between the title open and title close tag. I'll just call this responsive without media queries. All right, we have some other things we want to add here as well. Let's go up to the style section now. Before the style close tag, we're going to add some more CSS. The only item we have in there, the only declaration or rule we've given is to the HTML tag for the box sizing. We're going to do one for the body tag as well. So the selector here is body. I very simply want to put on the body a margin of 0 to get rid of any white space that might occur around the top or left or right or bottom of the layout. We're going to give a default font to the body as well, but you need to know first how I'm doing that. I went to Google and identified 2 fonts that I wanted to use on the page. You can go to Google Fonts and do the same thing. I selected 2, as I said, and so it gave me the code for that, which I've taken the liberty of copying, and I'm going to paste that in before the style open tag, actually. This is going to go before the style section, right up there. Watch this. Okay, I just pasted it in. This was the code I got from Google Fonts, telling me how I can use Montserrat and Cinzel fonts on my page. So that's the start of it, and we'll go back to the CSS now. So inside the body, we want to change the default font by doing the following: font dash family, and I'm going to put in here Montserrat, comma, sans serif. So there's the font I've chosen, which is one of the 2 that I've been able to get from Google Fonts. Let's change the default color for the page. This will be text that would appear on the page, and giving it a default color, $EEE is what we'll use, which will be a pretty light gray. And that's all we're going to do for that. Next, we're going to do the image tag. We want to do this basically for every page we create. And we're going to type in max dash width colon 100% semicolon height colon auto. Right, so for a general style, we're going to style some other things too. For example, we have a button here. Let's go back and look at that button. Here's the button. It says view our line. So we want to do the styling that will make that appear as such with the red background. You'll notice there's a little corner border radius in the upper left, right, and bottom left, right of the button itself. Let's write that. That is dot button. And here's what we're going to put in there. First of all, we're going to give it that background color. That'll be a # D3001D semicolon. It looks like this color red right there. After the background color, we're going to give it some padding all the way around 8 pixels. Let's do the border radius next. And we'll give it a border radius of 3 pixels all the way around every corner. The color of this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to go with # DDD. And we're going to give it a font size. This font size will be 0.8 EM. And we want to remove any underline that might occur since it's going to be a link. Text dash decoration colon none. Next, we're going to do the basic grid layout for the master container grid. And we're going to begin that by doing the dot container. Remember, this contains the entire layout. I said earlier it's going to be a very simple grid, so let's do DisplayColonGrid. And for columns, it's going to be this, grid dash template dash columns colon. I'm just going to do one FR here. So it's going to be a 1-column grid. And we're going to do grid auto rows as well. Auto rows will be min-max of 10 pixels, comma space auto, like so. That's our container, a very simple grid setup. Next thing we're going to do is place the main elements on the page. The first one is called main, the HTML5 element main. And we're going to type on some padding here of 5 rem space 2 rem. We're going to do grid column 1. It's a very simple grid, we said. We're going to come back here later and put in a background color, so we're going to leave that for now. I'll leave a little space there so we can come back and fill that in, but we have at least identified that we're going to have main as the first major section, if you will, inside the container. The main element is right here. Okay, the next one's going to be called section. Section is going to be very similar in that it will use grid column 1. This is going to be a grid container itself, so I'm going to leave some space there. We'll come back and type into this area in a bit, but let's get these major elements in here first. And after the section is going to be a footer. The footer will also be grid dash column 1. We'll leave some space and come back. Okay, so the main container is here. Inside of that, the first box that's going to be placed on grid column 1 is main. It'll span the entire width, in other words. Then section, and then footer. Now we have a lot of other CSS to write, so let's go back up and do that. So inside main, where we didn't finish it, let's come up here and put some more CSS in. The first thing we need to do is put the background image in there. So we'll do background colon URL parentheses. After the parentheses, I'm going to type center so we can place it as well. This is a bit of shorthand with the background property. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put the path to the image, which would be images line dash header dot JPEG. Let's give it a background size property as well. this will simply say cover. Now, grid is going to be turned into a grid container as well. So here's where the first bit of heavy lifting comes in. The first time we're going to use AutoFit or AutoFill. So main is going to need to do the responsiveness at the top of the page. We'll drop down that paragraph of text on the top right below want line when it gets narrow enough. So to turn main into a grid container, we're going to type DisplayColonGrid. And here it comes, the first bit of magic. Grid dash template dash columns. Repeat. Inside parentheses, we're going to type auto dash fit. We'll use AutoFit instead of AutoFill here. Comma, min max. Some more parentheses inside those go the min max. First of all, 280 pixels. Comma space 1FR, like so, put our semicolon in. So the repeat function is going to be used here, as we've used many times before, along with the AutoFit keyword, which is specified to do a minimum width of the material inside that box at 280 pixels and a remainder at 1FR. Let's quickly do one more thing in here, align dash items, center. Double check everything in the main there. That's what you should have inside the main. The next element that's going to be styled, we'll go down to the HTML and look at this. Inside the main, we're going to have something that says want wine, and that's encompassed in an H1 tag. So since that comes within the main, I'll put it up here after the main CSS H1. We're going to give this some padding. 0 space 25 pix space 0 space 0 semicolon. Going to get rid of any margin that might be at the top. 0 margin top. I'm going to change the font size. Really big, 2.5 EM. And we're going to use a font family here that's a little different from the default, which is called CINZEL, like so. So that will style the H1 tag. Next up, we're going to go to the article, and we haven't typed that CSS either yet, so we'll put that in after the H1 article, like so. Article will have a different font family, the other one we've selected. MONTSERRAT, which is a sans serif style. We'll give it a font size as well. And this one will be 1.4 EM. And because the text might not show up perfectly on that background image, there's some areas that are lighter than others and the white text might get lost. We're going to enter a text dash shadow. The text shadow here will be 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 8 pixels, and we'll give it a color, $000. Remember, for text shadow, the first value here of 2 pixels is for the horizontal shadow. The next 2 pixels is for the vertical shadow. The 8 pixels up here is for the blur, the radius of the blur. And finally, we're giving the color of the shadow like that. Now, we didn't finish section, so let's go down and do that section. We did identify as being on grid column 1 of the main container layout. But we need to do some styling here as well. We're going to turn this into a grid container as well. So we start with DisplayColonGrid. And like the other one, we're going to need to do the grid dash template dash columns. And we'll specify this as a repeat function again. We'll use the AutoFit keyword. And it will use min-max. And inside the min-max parentheses, we'll put in the following: 330 pixels, comma, space auto. take a quick look at that. So this is going to turn the section into a grid container. All of the cards are going to go inside of that, and so we're going to use AutoFit to place those with a minimum of 300 pixels for each card and a maximum of auto. Next, let's go down and do the card CSS. So dot card. And I'm going to leave the width out of it for now. I'm going to come back and add that. Let's do padding on this, though, of 12 pixels. We'll need a color for the text. It will be a fairly dark gray at #333. We're going to give the cards a border. Remember, this class is going to be applied to each of the cards down below. So the border will be 1 pix. Solid, really light color AAA, fairly light gray. We're also going to want some room at the top, so we're going to do margin dash top. I will do 12 pixels. We're also going to want to have a drop shadow on these cards, so we're going to use box shadow for that. Box shadow will be the following values. We'll do 0, 6px space, 20px space, 0 space, and we're going to use the RGBA system for defining color. Inside the parentheses, we'll go to the following: 0, comma, space, 0, comma, space, 0, comma, space, 0.19. The first value is the horizontal offset of the shadow. The second one is the vertical offset of the shadow. This 20 pixels right here is what's called the blur, the amount of the blur. The 0 here is what's called the spread. And finally, the RGBA color system being used here to define a black color with 0, 0, 0, but with some transparency of 0.19. The next bit of CSS we're going to write is going to be for what's called the overlay. Why do we need to do the overlay? Well, we, down here inside the card, wrapped the image and the Cabernet Sauvignon inside a div class of overlay. This is simply to do a little alignment. So we're going to actually turn this into a little grid, and we're going to put these in the same location on the page. We'll use z-index to put this one on top of the image itself. So just a very little bit of use of CSS Grid to do that alignment. So let's go up here to the CSS again, and after the card CSS we had written, we'll open up some space and type dot overlay. Overlay, as I said, is going to be turned into a little grid container, so DisplayColonGrid. And it's going to, again, be a very simple grid, so we'll use grid dash template dash columns and :1fr. So 1 column grid. I'm going to tell it to align items to the end, and that's all we're going to write for that. Now, the next thing inside the overlay is what's called variety1, so that's going to be dot variety1. Remember, this is going to contain that image. So we are doing this with a grid container called overlay, so this is going to be a grid item inside the overlay. To do that now, we'll need to indicate its location, which will be grid dash column 1. And something's going to go on top of this. We want to make sure this goes underneath it with a z-index of 1. By the way, I'm going to add a grid row here as well of 1. So grid column 1, grid row 1, and z-index of 1. Variety 2 will be somewhat similar to that. Let's copy and paste that. Variety 2 will go in the same location, column 1, the whole width, but grid row 1 as well, but it will have a z-index of 2. I'm going to add a little bit more CSS to style some of what's in there, because remember what's in variety 2. It's the word for the title of the grape variety, like Cabernet Sauvignon. So we're going to add some more CSS to variety 2. For example, we're going to add a height of 1.3 EM. We're going to give it that background color. And we'll use the RGBA system. Inside those parentheses, we'll do a value of 24. 24, 24. This will be a fairly dark gray, and 0.7 to give the shading to it, a little bit of transparency. This one will have a Z index of 2, so it shows up on top of variety 1. We'll give it a color, $, EEE, font size as well, 1.2 EM, and we'll give it a padding all the way around to 20 pixels. The next thing is going to be the description. Let's go down and look at that. Here's the description. It falls outside of the overlay, but is inside the card, right? The div class of card. So we're going to put that up here before the footer. Description. And we're simply going to tell it to do a margin dash top of 10 pixels. Finally, let's style the footer a little bit as well. We've done grid column 1, but let's do a background color here as well. And we'll do a value of $, D3001D. Give the text on top a color of $, EEE. We'll give it a margin at the top of 18 pixels. And let's give it some padding on the left so it doesn't go all the way over to the edge of the layout. Also 18 pixels. I believe we've done all the styling we need to do. Let's save that. Now, I never did rename this file. This is still working on setup.html, so let's resave this. File save as. Let's call it wine.html. And let's look at it in a browser. Inside the learning folder. And it looks like we're missing something here. Here's the fix for the first one. The main, if you'll notice here, has a 2RED. I did a typo here. I'm going to change that to REM. You may have caught that earlier and fixed it yourself, but if you didn't, make sure you change that to REM. Let's take a look at that. Refresh the page, and there the top portion now works fine. It's responsive, no media queries, just using AutoFit. The grapes below, those card boxes, all work nicely as well. We have one more little problem I noticed down here at the bottom. The footer at the bottom doesn't have any spacing below or above the words. So let's go back and add that. And the fix for that is down below in the HTML. I had meant to wrap that text inside a paragraph tag, so let me put that in now. Here goes the P close tag. Let's resave that. Let's go back and check it. And there's the fix to the footer as well. Now, these boxes for the cards, you notice, are all stretching out across the page, and that might be the way you want that to look. I think that looks fine. It always fills up the width. You may want to do that a little bit differently, though, and here's one idea for you. If you go back up to the card class, we might want to add a width to that. I'm going to add 300 pixels. What's going on here? The containing class above it is telling it to make no box be less than 330. So that basically means that the card is going to stay at 300 pixels wide, and it's going to fit inside a container that will be no less than 330 pixels. Let's just try it and see what happens here. I've only added this. And you'll notice now the boxes stay at a certain width. I don't like the way these boxes are starting way over on the left-hand side to begin their space, so we can fix that pretty easily. Here's what I'm talking about. I'm going to go to the containing element, which is called section, and I'm going to add a justify-content of center. Let's check that. Now the page behaves like so. Now we can remove that again if you prefer. We'll go back and check it one more time. And there you have it, a complete page with 2 areas of responsiveness done with AutoFit, the one at the top and then the cards at the bottom.